Bang, bang, bang. Bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang. Man. That's like... That's the intro right there. Hello everybody and welcome to a build which we just kind of threw together today. I really wanted to try this out after having a conversation with Dark Humility, just to prove the point, and I ended up loving it to death. This is a Strafe Bowazon, but rather than using a bow, we are using a Buriza. I'll go into why we're doing that in just a quick second. But just to give you an idea, the Strafe Bowazon is someone who basically sits herself down as an active turret, and for 36 frames, rifles off bolts as fast as the eye can see, and absolutely mows through Players 1 content. So this is a really, really good build if you are trying to farm on low magic finds, so you're looking for bases, runes, jewels, crafting materials, as well as charms, in places like the Pit, Flare Jungle, if you're super unique farming like Eldritch, Pindle, and Shank, or trying to go into somewhere like Cows. So what does Strafe do? Well, Strafe converts your damage down to 3/4, so this is going to have some other effects, but then rifles off a bolt that can pierce every single target and shoots up to 10 times. But quite frankly, the build worked a lot better than I was expecting, especially coming from a more like elitist, multi-shot, Windforce concept of how this works. And this build is also built on a really aggressive budget. So I'll go ahead and show you the pieces that are probably the most expensive on it, but everything else is stuff you would quite literally pick up on your way to building out any of your other characters. To very quickly go into the main skills of the build, so obviously Strafe is going to be our predominant AoE attack. For single targets, we are using Magic Arrow. The benefit of Magic Arrow is that it's going to convert your damage over into magic damage. So this is really good for anybody who is immune to physical. And then on top of that, actually doesn't use any arrows or bolts. So you can fire Magic Arrow off forever. As a tech option, we are putting 1 point into Freezing Arrow and then our dump points into Ice Arrow. Freezing Arrow does an AoE freeze, so any monster that can be frozen will be frozen. And then in addition to that, it actually adds any other sources of cold damage as additional freeze length. We are freezing monsters for upwards of 5 seconds depending on their various stats. So this is a huge safety option. And if you don't have enough damage in the beginning to be able to clearly gun everything down, dropping a couple freezing arrows in between every other volley will keep you very safe because we are running this build as a glass cannon option. For passive and magic, we are fully dumping all points into crit and penetrate. It's really important to have enough attack rating on this build, and we are teching down into decoy in case there's any higher dangerous monsters that we're fighting or our mercenary can't keep them away from us. You'll see that we don't have any points into pierce, and again, we are using a Buriza. The Buriza piercing attack stat actually has 100% pierce here. So this is one of the benefits of using this weapon, and I'll go into the other one once we're looking at the rest of our gear. As far as stats, you'll see that we have a decent incorporation of strength. We do have an upped Buriza, which has a really high strength requirement. And in addition to that, we're using a Demon Limb on swap for a little bit of elemental damage, but for 218 percentile increase to our attack rating. And this thing requires 133 strength. For the rest of our stats, we put in enough points into Vitality to be just over 1,000. I feel like this is a pretty safe spot where you have just enough life to be able to survive long enough for your life leech to keep you up. And then all of the rest of our points get dumped into dexterity. So we have 241 base dexterity. And why do we do that? On a bow, 100% of your dexterity is counted as enhanced damage. So this is not only going to drastically increase our attack rating, but it's also going to bump up our physical damage on our bow by quite a bit. For the build itself, while you are going to see a really good torch, which we got at the beginning of the season, and then a one-off imperfect Annihilus charm, thanks to Lucky Luciano hooked us up. But if you haven't followed him already, go give him a follow. He is a phenomenal dude. He does so much for the community. And if you're missing out on all the streams right now, you are quite literally missing out on some of the best content on the web. I can't gush about the dude enough. The major portion of our build here is the Buriza. We've also upped this into a Colossus crossbow, which does increase the stats that are required to use it, but also is a pretty significant increase to its base damage. And if anybody knows on a physical damage build, the most important stat to increase is the weapon's base damage, since that's then going to be multiplied and enhanced by other sources. The benefit of the Buriza here, again, 100% pierce on the weapon, 80 increased attack speed on the weapon as well. For crossbows, the max attack frame that you can get up to is 11 frames, with very little increased attack speed and abusing the animation roll of strafe. We're looking at a 36 frame total attack on strafe, so that's 10 attacks in 36 frames, 3.6 frames per attack, which is very fast. So that's below the 4 frame per attack window, and the base weapon speed here helps us to get up to that breakpoint very easily. With the base increased attack speed here, you actually only need 30 increased attack speed on the rest of your gear to be at the max strafe frames. And if you actually have 40 increased attack speed on gear, you're at the 12 frame for any of your other attacks, which is one off of perfect. For the Buriza, you have a couple options of what to socket into it. You really don't need IAS here, since you can get on other pieces of gear that you're going to end up using. And the best things that you can put into here are either flat max damage, enhanced damage on weapon, plus to dex, which acts as enhanced damage off weapon, or you can put a hell rune into this, which will reduce its strength requirement by 32, which is enough to add more to dex or more to vitality, depending on how you want to optimize your build. Other options on this really are pretty cheap, and I'm actually going to go ahead and show you some additional options that you could use so that you can customize this build however you want. But to finish going over our primary build, I am using a Vamp Gaze. This is our only source of mana leech, as well as a huge amount of physical damage reduction. And if you saw in the intro, we're basically unkillable as long as we can leech, and the monsters aren't casting spells on us. So those cows quite literally could not have killed me fast enough, and that's due in part to the PDR here on a Vamp Gaze. We're using a Lionheart. If you don't understand just how powerful a Lionheart is, it's like baby's first fortitude. So that 25 to strength and 15 to dexterity basically say 40 enhanced damage. So on top of the other enhanced damage, this is a 60 enhanced damage piece. It's also going to give us 20 to vitality, 50 flat life, a little bonus to energy, and then 30 all res. It's very difficult to stack all res on this build, so you end up having to sacrifice a lot of your charm inventory for resistances, and this helps to bump it up as well as you can, again, before you get into a fortitude. We're using a High Lords. In addition to the crit chance that we get from skills, this High Lord basically says that we will critically strike 80% of the time. It's also that 20 IAS piece that we need on at least one of our pieces, as well as a decent chunk of lightning resistance. On the belt, since we don't need Pierce, Nosferatu's is actually a really nice piece. Not only does it shore up the IAS that we need, but additional life leech slows target on each strafe bolt that we shoot, as well as mana per kill is a lot of survivability and quality of life that you can wear, since we don't need Razor Tail. On the gloves, there are a lot of different options, and I'll go over a couple of them. But very simply, we're using Dracools. The life tap on striking is going to proc a lot, since you're attacking so many targets, and it will work in an area of effect. The life tap is going to allow you to leech off of monsters you can't normally, like the undead or different bosses that wouldn't have leech. In addition to that, open wounds is kind of nice. Life per kill is also huge here. 10 life per kill means that if life tap hasn't gone off and you're not able to leech off of the monster, once it dies, you are going to gain some life back, and that's huge. Every Bowazon is going to need to use at least one Ravenfrost. This is a bare minimum. You really can't argue against having a Ravenfrost. And then for your second ring, there are a lot of cheaper options, and you're going to see a lot of ridiculous rare and crafted options in this slot. But anything that says res or dex, attack rating, life or mana leech, min or max damage is what you want on this ring, and the more of those stats, the better. On the primary kit, you're going to see people wearing War Travelers, because that flat damage is then going to be enhanced by your ED on your weapon, and it does a solid amount of increase to your overall DPS. I've actually opted for not wearing War Travelers at this point. When we go over the alternative gear options, I'll go into why. Down in the charms, you are going to want to have a combination of resistance, life, run walk, as well as damage, attack rating, and flat stats like strength or dex. So if I were to show you an option like this, a 5 max, AR, 5 strength, this thing basically says 5 enhanced damage, 6 max damage is the maximum that you can get with a good chunk of AR, And then the rest of our charms are quite literally whatever ones I had that said any of these stats, as well as the Geeds, just so we can get some magic find on the build. The Mercenary has a lot of customization that you can put into it. The first two most important pieces are keeping them alive. I'm using a Treachery. Your Mercenary is going to get hit at some point. The Fade will proc, as well as the huge increased attack speed is going to get him up to a really high increased attack speed breakpoint. For the headpiece, you're really going to want to stack anything like physical damage reduction, life leech, all res. This thing is basically a souped up version of a Tal's mask that I found early in the ladder. And right now we are using a Reaper's Toll. Being able to pick up a non-ethereal Reaper's Toll is really, really cheap. People really only care about it if it's ethereal, but the only reason why we care about this is because of the massive amount of life leech on it, as well as Decrepify. So Decrepify is going to be able to break a lot of physical immunes in the game that become physically immune due to stone skin, especially in cows. When the Decrepify goes off, we increase our damage. When our life tap goes off from Dracools, we're increasing our survivability. So we're kind of trading off quality of life and the ability to increase our damage against high physical damage reduction monsters. Also, I didn't talk about it. We are using a Might or a Mercenary to bump up our physical damage. I'm just going to take this and cut that back into the Mercenary part of it. You can use Holy Freeze as well if you are on a lower power scale or feel like you're dying too often. But Might Aura is going to increase their survivability because they're going to be able to leech better and increase your attack damage. So I've alluded to a lot of different options that you can use on this build, and it really comes down to either how budget or high tier you end up being with the build itself. A couple options, depending on where you're farming, is something like Laying of Hands. So Laying of Hands is going to shore up all of your fire res. You're basically not going to have any problems with this. And then the 350 enhanced damage to demons off weapon is huge if you want to take this character and clear places like Chaos Sanctuary. So not only is it going to help against the Pit Lords, but it's going to pretty drastically increase your damage output against DIablo. You can also wear something like a Shaco here to increase your magic find. Some of the benefits of the Shaco is that increase to mana also means that you're not as reliant on mana leech. And then while the +2 to skills isn't super important on something like a Strafe Zon, you do get enhanced damage from the skill per skill level, so +2 isn't a complete waste here. But it's very easy to slot this magic find in and still maintain that survivability. Something like the Cat's Eye is an even more budget option, so you really don't want to lose the 20 increased attack speed, but that 30 run walk as well as 25 dex, which counts as 25 enhanced damage off weapon, it's actually really sick. The faster run walk is also good if you're farming something like the pits or cows, because it's going to get you into those areas faster. I know I said you don't need a Razor Tail on this build, but to very quickly talk about it, Razor Tail does say 10 max damage and 15 dex or 15 ED, so this is a really nice piece if you are looking to just bump up your max damage as much as possible, because this is going to then be multiplied multiple times over by all the various forms of ED that you have. Another really budget option set for this, if you do not have the attack rating in your charms to back it up, or if you don't want to use a demon limb, is to use the angelic sets. So if you've never seen the angelic set, first off, I highly recommend it, obviously, but a 2-piece angelic set is going to say upwards of 1,000 attack rating per ring, as well as 40 life if you wear 2 together, additional life on the amulet, and additional dexterity. So we are at a solid 24,000 attack rating, which basically means we have 95% chance to hit everything other than the Ubers at level 86, and even with only 1 ring, your attack rating issues are basically fully handled, sitting at 18,000 AR. You are obviously going to lose a lot of quality of life if you're using 3 pieces of angelics here. I would still recommend keeping a Ravenfrost on deck, but if you have increased attack speed from your other pieces, you could even drop High Lords and wear 2-piece angelics, just so that you basically will always hit. I know I talked about having a demon limb on swap, and this benefit is something that isn't abundantly clear at first, but let me go ahead and show you what our stats look like without it. So on the base build itself, we're sitting at 9,500 attack rating, which I really wouldn't say is enough, right? Just using the enchant from Demon Limb bumps us up to 15,000 attack rating. So that's a 6k increase in attack rating. I personally like this option. The benefit of using Demon Limb is that the enchant is going to last for over 11 minutes. So 11 minutes and 12 seconds. This is long enough to farm anything that you want. So if you then want to swap over to a teleport staff or to a harmony to gain vigor aura on swap, that is absolutely a very easy customization to this build. And I'm personally going to go make a harmony rune word just so that I can have that vigor on swap to increase my clear speed. The last two things that are easy to customize and are also available to on a low budget here would be the weapon that your mercenary is using. So the Reaper's Toll is to be able to apply that Decrepify across the field. If we were having issue with mana or we weren't mana leeching enough, you could obviously be using an Insight on your Mercenary. With the Insight on the Mercenary, it's going to be a lot easier, but you're still going to have to use mana potions on your belt. Or if you're going to be farming against bosses, the Bowazon does okay damage to bosses, but isn't really able to apply a lot of Crushing Blow, especially using a ranged weapon. So something like an Obedience will really drastically increase your damage against bosses. So if you're farming Chaos Sanctuary, killing DIablo will be a lot easier. The last option, and I alluded to this earlier, is what do you wear in the boot slot? So another option that you could be wearing is something like an Alder's boot. Since we're not using Laying of Hands, the 45 fire res here would basically mean that we're full capped on fire res. The 50 life is really, really nice. And then in addition to that, it's going to be the fastest run walk that you can have on a set boot in the game. So the run walk on a Bowazon is really important. Obviously, her mobility is completely constrained by run walk, and this is a really good option. It's going to be a bit tankier, which is nice, especially on a lower power scale. What we have actually ended up using is some combination of these two concepts. We have a really nice pair of rare boots, so 30 run walk, hit recovery, dual res, and magic find. This lets us keep an okay amount of magic find on the build, as well as getting a faster run walk than the war travs, a little bit of hit recovery, which can be nice, and then resistances at all, and this is probably the nice sweet spot. Obviously, your boot choice comes down to completely to how you want to run the character. If you just want to go fast like Sonic, chuck on your Alders and never look back. If you like having the more damage, which would be important on higher player count, War Travs is the obvious option. We talked about the fact that this is a glass cannon build. How does it feel? You are basically unkillable by anything that isn't actively reducing your resistances and blowing you away with elemental damage. If you were so inclined, getting a better Annihilus Charm or a better Torch is obviously a really good avenue for bumping up your all-res. And then having any actual charms down here. Our charms are, I'll go ahead and say it, they're basically trash city. These are just the extra ones that I had lying around. And it would be really easy to load up on more all-res, more specific res, or load up on additional damage and life down here in your charms. Since this is such a good cow farmer, it would be a great place to start farming Nightmare Cows on, just putting on as much run speed as you can, and then picking up as many charms as possible. The last thing that I will say is that you can absolutely go through and change out two major parts of this build for additional survivability, and that is in crafting knockback gloves, or putting a Nephrune for knockback into the Buriza. We opted for a 38 enhanced damage jewel here, but knockback would be a really good option since Strafe is going to proc it on every bolt that you shoot. And if you eventually get those 2 to bow and crossbow, 20 IAS, knockback, dual leech, all res, or dual res gloves or magic find gloves, that would be a really good option as well. But until you find something like that, you can definitely pilot this on any of the more widely available set and unique options in the same slot. I'll go ahead and throw in just some footage of us farming a couple different places here so you can get an idea of how it felt. It's a lot less APM, so if you're the kind of person who wants to have a good amount of power on your build, survivability, but also aren't looking to be pumping out hammered in levels of APM or poison necro levels of APM, this is a really, really good option. The last thing that I will say is that there are so many upgrades to this build. If you were to throw on a perfect Windforce or a perfect Faith Bow, Fortitude in your slot, perfect jewels and everything, max IAS, perfect slots on your Mercenary, the damage on this build, like 2 to 3 times increases in total DPS. So it has a lot of upward mobility. If you're looking for something that is fun to play on lower player count and can scale into higher player count and better magic finding and better power potential, I would highly recommend the Strafe Zon. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that I answered all the questions. If you had any other questions, leave a comment below. Also, if you liked the video, maybe like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. We're trying to do like a big YouTube grind. I'd like to hit 4K subs before the end of the month, so I'd appreciate that as well. And I hope that you enjoyed the video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.